Where's that happened?
Hit a little tree on the end of the...
Is it on the skid? Okay. Training months.
Whether they were out for a pleasure cruise or just to fish, all manner of boats crowded the water at Nelson Bay today. Water authorities conducted random breath tests, ensuring skippers were under the limit.
Similar to on the roads, 0.05 for the master of a recreational vessel, commercial operators at 0.02.
They also checked that adequate numbers of life jackets were on board.
Every person on board the vessel must have a personal flotation device. We strongly recommend that children under 12 years of age actually wear them.
Not having enough life jackets can result in a $1,500 fine if the matter goes to court. Meanwhile, accessing Newcastle Harbour proved a little more difficult for the city's boat owners, with the region's only launching ramp at Carrington in disrepair.
Very rough and uneven, so it makes it hard to get in and out, and it just dips straight over the edge of the concrete, and your wheels spin when you try to get out.
While Newcastle City Council has restored the facility's parking lot, it's still a few months off before work will begin on the ramp itself, with Council waiting on approval for the upgrade from the New South Wales Maritime Authority. Madeline Bond, NBN News.
A new school uniform, her hair in a perfect ponytail and a 12 for Dad before skipping out the door. Abby Tasker had this dress rehearsal down pat today, 3 weeks before she starts school for the first time.
Excited, but also a bit apprehensive, I suppose. It's a big step, like her first day at school. But yeah, a big step for independence for her as well.
Abby will join one of 3 kindergarten classes at the brand new $6 million Ashtonfield Public School this year. Built under a public-private partnership, it's the first new public school to be constructed in the Maitland area since 1980 and was designed to ease the pressure on existing schools, including East Maitland Public.
It's good it's a brand new school. I think everyone will be challenged to make sure it succeeds well. So we're very excited for her to be in the local school close to home.
The first day of school will mark a double milestone for Abby.
The first year to go all the way through, so it'll be exciting now and in 6 years' time.
But while she's ready to go, her parents are nervous about the big day.
Well, I think I might have a small tear in my eye as well as Mum's.
But if Dad thinks letting go of his little girl now is a big step, imagine how he'll feel when this dress rehearsal becomes reality. Christy Carter, NBN News.
Still carrying battle scars from last night's game, the 6-week pitch renovation didn't go to plan, leaving Jets management fuming.
The pitch was, to put it bluntly, disgraceful. We went through that last year and we were given assurances that it wouldn't happen again, and it's happened again.
Ground managers, the Newcastle Knights, claim they gave no such assurance. For the renovation to be successful, they say, hot days were needed and there just wasn't enough of them.
You can't give a guarantee against cool weather. What was said to them, of course, is that December is the optimum time for grass growth.
The spat adds to long-running tension between tenant and landlord, but the Jets are at least claiming a win on the crowd front. The New Year's Day clash brought people out of the woodwork and into the stadium, with the 20,980 spectators setting a new mark.
Look, it was just magnificent to be involved in a game where, it was the record crowd for a Newcastle game in the whole of the history.
This crowd breaking the previous mark of 18,517 when Australia played Rapid Vienna in 1955. It gave Newcastle supporters something to cheer about on an otherwise disappointing night on the park. Adam McIlwright, NBN News.
Good on you, mates. The Australian Southern Stars marching here in Pasadena. We'll come back to wrap things up here at the Tournament of Roses Parade.
Bolton hasn't won a league game at Anfield in 52 years, and when Peter Crouch pulled this off, you knew the drought wasn't about to break. Captain Stephen Gerrard followed him in minutes later. A third goal, a 3-0 win and third place on the ladder. Tottenham had beaten Portsmouth in their last 4 outings, but Benjani got Pompey off to a great start. The Spurs struck back after the break before grinding out a draw. At Newcastle, James Milner got the home side off to a sensational start against the league leaders. Paul Scholes somehow threaded this one through to draw Manchester United level, before adding another just 23 seconds into the second half. But 19-year-old Canadian David Edgar gave a gutsy Newcastle a share of the points with a stunner. After being accused of missing last night's match, Paul Ocon was one of the first Jets to training this morning, and he was a little surprised to hear all the fuss that he'd failed to attend the game. He had, sitting with his son on the hill.
What, was I supposed to coach the team? I don't know. I was there, contrary to reports.
You're the captain of the team. I think if you show your face at the beginning of the game, at half-time and at the end of the game.
No, I don't think that's expected of me to do that. Yeah. Really expected of anyone, whether I'm captain or not.
If he's either playing or he's not playing, he can impart a lot of knowledge to a lot of the players, and a lot of the players still look up to him.
The pair didn't speak at training, but General Manager George Liolio said they had sorted things out during the day. Either way, Ocon won't be playing on Friday night against Central Coast due to a recurrence of a quad strain. Joel Griffiths and Jade North are also injury concerns for the game, which is being described as a grand final, with both fighting for full spot on the ladder.
Pulled up a little bit sore, but just a bit of stiffness in my back. So, but that should be right.
It's made it for a big clash, and I think whoever wins that game will go on to make the fall.
Jim Callanan, NBN News. At 21, Jason Doyle has the Speedway world at his feet. Recently signed to race for a professional team in England after a top year riding overseas, he's back home to show his wares in front of family and friends.
Riding on my home track at Newcastle, it's one I've rode a few meetings here, and I know what lines to take and where the dirt runs to, and I guess that's a bit of an advantage.
Every bit will help considering the strength of the field for the Australian Series. Multiple Australian champion Lee Adams hasn't lost a race in the series for 2 years, but world champion Jason Crump has returned from another stellar season in Europe and is keen to add the national title to his list of credits.
I always looked up to Lee and Todd, and now it's Jason Crump back to riding in the Australian title as well, so it's going to be good to ride against them boys.
Those big name riders will hit town by tomorrow as everyone gets a chance to practice in the afternoon, but the local says winning at Newcastle Showground comes down to a simple plan.
It's more of a track where you have to get out front. If you're out in front off the gate, and it's like you can do your own lines and find the dirt, and it's one of the best tracks in the country.
It was a pleasant morning at the beach until a surf club veteran spotted a large shark lurking behind the break.
This morning about 9 o'clock we had a sighting by a member of the public, a creditable sighting and a positive sighting with being seen twice, so we went into our shark protocol procedure.
That involved lifeguard Scott Hamilton getting straight on the jet ski to both search for the shark and make those in the water aware of the danger. The beach was closed for nearly an hour while the search was carried out, but the shark wasn't sighted again. Lifeguards say it's the first confirmed sighting of a large shark off city beaches this summer, reminding swimmers and surfers of the ever-present danger.
We'll continue monitoring all day. I said the jet ski's out now doing our grid search procedure, and we'll be warning people, and especially the surfers surfing out the back, and we'll just continue monitoring, and if Westpac does happen to fly over, we'll get them to have a look as well.
It's been 40 years since anyone has been killed by a shark off a Newcastle beach, the same length of time that shark netting has been in place.
It's the suppliers that this end that pay for the ships to be parked up. That's why they send them over here. They don't leave them parked up over the other side of the world where they don't receive any money for them.
1,200 meals are prepared in this kitchen 3 days a week, catering for Newcastle's 900 Meals on Wheels customers. For $5.50 per day, they get an entree, main meal, dessert and juice. However, last month, dozens of elderly customers got a nasty shock when Shadow Health Minister Gillian Skinner claimed the service would begin charging twice the price for smaller-sized meals. Today, those fears were laid to rest.
They are not true as far as Newcastle is concerned. We still have our same size meals, and we've been charging the same price now for quite some time. And at this stage there's no intention of increasing that price.
Since the announcement, the service's Newcastle branch has been flooded with complaints and customer concerns.
People want to cancel their meals because they felt they couldn't afford to pay double what they're paying now.
Without Meals on Wheels, many elderly people say they would be forced to move into nursing homes.
They're really excellent, and in the kitchen, and the people who deliver as well, they're just lovely all the time. For Sister Diana Santelban, looking after the environment is as important to her as religion. Over the past 12 months, she's slowly transformed the Dominican Sisters Convent into an environmentally friendly and water self-sufficient haven. After installing 3 water tanks, 1 water bin and a drum, the convent can now store up to 10,000 litres of water.
We have enough water tanks now to be almost self-sufficient with this sort of climate anyway.
The house even has its own biological filter for grey water, which recycles toilet, shower and washing water through a worm farm and ultraviolet steriliser. She's also well on her way to growing all of her fruit and vegetables. The garden crammed full of everything from pumpkins to spinach and peaches. And there's even a solar panel powered fountain. Her next step is to install 9 solar panels on the convent's roof, so they can also be electrically self-sufficient.
If you can do it in an ordinary little suburban house like this, you can do it anywhere. You know.
Fossil fuels, including coal, produce 90% of our energy. They're the most reliable and affordable source, and it's predicted coal will provide our baseload electricity for at least the next 40 years.
Coal use will probably, in fact, grow in the shorter term, but I would imagine that in the longer term, and we're talking about a number of decades out, possibly more than 4 or 5, but that renewables will take over as the main source.
To get us to the age of renewables, scientists at the CSIRO's Newcastle headquarters are on a mission to clean the coal industry. Their end of the deal is to create a chemical which can be sprayed on coal gas and stick to the carbon dioxide molecules, allowing the CO2 to be separated and isolated. The process, called carbon capture, could be used at coal-fired power stations in the future.
Our goal is to try and help existing power stations have the option of cleaning up their emissions, particularly with regards to CO2, which is the main greenhouse gas.
This is where it gets a little radical. Once captured, the CO2 would then be stored in underground geological structures, such as reservoirs that once held natural gas or even old coal seams.
And also looking at the engineering conditions that would be needed to make sure that not only could you pump it down there, but you could seal it in once it was stored there.
At existing power stations such as Bayswater and Liddell, millions of dollars worth of modifications would be needed to implement clean coal technologies such as carbon capture and storage. Clean coal comes at a cost, and that means everyone will pay more for electricity. Grant Every Burns from Macquarie Generation says those power station upgrades would happen if governments crack down on carbon dioxide emission levels.
If it's required of everyone, then there will be no issue at all. The price of power will be higher than it is today, and any plant built would have those collectors fitted to them.
The carbon capture and storage technology is something that could be used in Australian coal-fired power stations in the near future. Testing of the underground storage will be conducted in Victoria early next year.
I don't think there's any impediment to capturing CO2. I think the real issue is what you do with it when you've captured it.
Probably within 5 to 10 years, I think people would feel more confident for the very large-scale, long-duration storage that we're talking about.
Tomorrow night we'll look at how renewable energy sources such as wind and solar power can add to the energy jigsaw in the short and long-term future.
The morning after day one of the 49er national titles was spent making running repairs after a wild opening series of races.
Yesterday was probably one of the toughest days you'd get out on the water. It was pretty easy to see when you looked around and half the boats are upside down and there was broken masts.
No such worries for overnight leader Nathan Outeridge in what's been every bit the perfect start in a dream comeback. It's almost 2 years to the day since a car crash threatened to end his sailing career. Now he's pushing for an Olympics berth.
You could sort of stop and actually go and get a real job and sort of be safe and whatever, or you can actually follow your dreams and do what you really want to do. And I think we're on the way to doing that now.
Well on the way. Outeridge and crew Ben Austin remain in first place overall. What races they didn't win today, his Lake Macquarie rival did. Two-time Olympian Chris Nicholson back in the water and testing it.
It's just one to see what potential we had, not necessary results.
Nicholson and crew Ewan McNichol are second on aggregate with 2 days of racing left.
There's a very strong field, and I'm sure there's a lot of guys who are desperately keen to try and beat me if they can, and I'm looking forward to the challenge.
At a time when he should be enjoying the spoils of his biggest win yet, Tom Scott is never far from a running track. Neither is his girlfriend Katie, who's just as dedicated as a part-time trainer. She was among the crowd when, in atrocious conditions, the 21-year-old won the famed Bay Sheffield Sprint in Adelaide. He shrugged off injury, a lack of favouritism, massive headwinds and a tough international field to collect the plate and a cheque for $13,000.
Just the first goal for the season really. It's just a bit of a stepping stone to bigger and better things, I hope.
That could include the country's richest professional race, the Stall Gift, under the guidance of coach Tony Fairweather.
Oh, he's the best coach, you know. He's always there to support you, and he's obviously one of the best coaches in Australia because he just keeps proving how good he is over and over again.
If you think you've heard this story before, then you'd be right. Before Joshua Ross switched camps to Sydney, Fairweather developed him into one of the country's best over 100 metres, enjoying the same sort of early success as Scott.
I'm looking forward to having a run against him actually because during the off-season we were raced together a lot and I was catching him every time or getting closer to him every time, so it'd be interesting to see how far off him I am now.
A meeting that's likely to come about in the upcoming A-Series.
Around 50 police canvassed the Department of Housing area in Bar Beach this morning. Speaking to residents of the complex in Light Street, they attempted to piece together exactly what happened last night.
Police have spoken to a number of persons who were in the vicinity of the area, and from that information, police are now very keen to speak to 3 young male persons who were seen in the vicinity of the units shortly after the victim was found.
Just after midnight, 36-year-old Gordon French, pictured here in an old police photo, was discovered inside the foyer of a unit block with several stab wounds. A trail of blood at the scene, evidence of how he must have staggered down the stairs to find help. Ambulance officers attempted to resuscitate Mr French at the scene, but he went into cardiac arrest and was taken to the John Hunter Hospital where he died a short time later. Local residents say they heard men involved in a brawl at around midnight.
I was in bed asleep and I woke up to hear an argument and that. And it lasted for about 30 seconds a minute and then I went back to sleep.
James Baker, a close friend, says Gordon French was a quiet father who kept to himself. Mr Baker and his wife are now planning to move because they feel unsafe living at the housing estate.
When we woke up this morning, the police knocked on the door and said he passed away. I was shocked because I was only talking to him yet last night, 7 o'clock.
Police are still investigating a possible motive for the stabbing. Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
Catherine Hill Bay resident Sue White isn't against development, but like many of her neighbours, she is opposed to a Sydney developer's plans to build a 600-plus dwelling residential development in her backyard.
Now that we've actually seen the plans, they are every bit as bad as we could have ever imagined.
The Catherine Hill Bay Progress Association says it simply doesn't have the infrastructure to support such a large development. Sewerage, water and traffic flow in the existing narrow streets the top concerns. It fought hard to have the project overturned, and both Lake Macquarie Council and the Land and Environment Court agreed. But just when it thought it had succeeded, a state government legislative loophole saw Planning Minister Frank Sartor overrule the decision.
Land Environment Court particularly stipulated no development on the headland. Coastal policy says no headlands to be developed. And what have we got? We've got residential apartments out there.
The developer says that its proposal will see 80% of the land placed in public ownership, but Sue White argues the land has conservation protection and should not be allowed to be touched at all. Residents will now present their feedback to the government. Christy Carter, NBN News.
You wouldn't catch many surfers treating their baby like this, let alone this. But Paul Woodbine's new product is unlike any other surfboard.
The difference is durability, strength and flex. And at the same time we're giving a light, strong surfboard, which really is what every surfer wants, and have a surfboard that lasts.
Paul has been working on the concept of a fiberglass-free board in his Newcastle factory for 5 years, with the design now complete. It starts as a polystyrene blank, is machine-shaped and tidied up by hand. The board's then coated in a plastic skin, which is moulded using a vacuum process. But that part is so top secret, we can't show you. The whole thing only takes 3 hours, and the best bit, dings and snap noses, are going to become a lot less of a problem.
Because our boards, again, are made of an ABS plastic, which is the same materials used in crash helmets. So if you throw a crash helmet on the road or on the thing, it doesn't scratch, it doesn't ding, so that's what our surfboards do.
Incredibly, all the materials are recyclable, making this surfboard environmentally friendly as well.
Our ABS, which is our outer shell, it goes back to our manufacturer where we buy it off, and it comes back to us in our form sheets again. Our styrene foam goes back to the manufacturer but goes into cement pods.
The boards are being wholesaled to surf shops in Australia with plans to export them to Japan and Hawaii. Jessica Phyllis, NBN News.
That's a cowrie shell. That's pretty special to see a cowrie.
There are big games and big games.
It's our grand final, it's their grand final, it's a local derby, there'll be fire and brimstone from both camps, and it should be a magnificent spectacle.
I think all the boys know that it's probably do or die for us this week.
Monday night's disappointing loss to Sydney has made the Jets' campaign for a top 4 finish that much harder.
I myself want a better game than what I did against Sydney, just didn't happen for us. We're losing too much ball.
The finger pointed at both players and a woeful stadium surface, but it's the latter which will force change in the Newcastle squad tomorrow night.
Obviously the pitch isn't conducive to playing fluent football, so sometimes you have to change your style.
Joel Griffiths and Jade North have overcome minor injuries to take their place in the squad, while captain Paul Ocon's quadriceps strain will keep him sidelined for another week. Such is the build-up The coach is giving nothing away, but did say there could be changes up front.
Maybe that's a sort of an area where we have to look at. Obviously, it was the first time since I've taken over that we haven't scored.
A look inside the Mariners camp, and discipline is the buzzword, with 4 players on the verge of suspension. When you've got the world's best on show, it's a moment worth capturing. Speedway made a welcome return to the city last night, and it didn't take long before the full house, indeed the entire neighbourhood, to find out. When the world champion's in town, everyone wants to beat him, and early in the night, Jason Crump was. He shook it off though to finish first in every other heat. Multiple national champion Lee Adams hasn't lost a race in the series for 2 years until last night. Adams finished first in the B final, but not after disappointment in the heats when engine failure robbed the Victorian of 3 series points. Despite not winning a race, local rider Jason Doyle did claim a victory of sorts, just being able to compete alongside his idols. The 21-year-old showed plenty of promise and at one point took the lead from the Australian champ, if only for a moment. But the night and round belonged to Crump, as the Queenslander finished first in the A final to lead the championship on points going into the Sydney leg of the series tomorrow night.
Wind and solar power both have a big tick in the environmentally friendly box, but the fact is at the moment they're unable to provide baseload electricity as it's required. Their limitations are obvious. Wind turbines only produce power when the wind's blowing, and solar panels are useless at night or when it's cloudy.
If we're going to rely heavily on renewables in the future, we do need energy storage devices developed, whether they're electrical storage or thermal storage.
At the CSIRO in Newcastle, a test solar field is under construction. Captured in time-lapse, 200 mirrors and a tower are being built. Once complete, the mirrors will track the sun and reflect light onto a reactor on top of the tower. There, the solar energy will mix with natural gas and water to make something called solar gas. Solar gas can be used to power a gas turbine or process further to make pure hydrogen. The real advantage of solar gas is that it can be stored.
We can then transport it, we can move it around the country, we can deliver it at the time that it's actually required.
CSIRO scientists predict that solar could provide Australia's entire electricity needs by 2020. But to do so, we'd need to build a solar field like this, only it would have to be 50 kilometres by 50 kilometres. That's about the same size as the city of Sydney. There is hope for solar though. At the Liddell coal-fired power station in the Hunter Valley, solar is actually being used to assist electricity production. Using mirrors to concentrate sunlight on water pipes, it will produce steam to be injected into the power station, reducing the amount of coal burnt to turn cold water into steam to run the generating turbines.
Now in that way, when the sun's shining, the coal requirement of the power station is backed off somewhat, and the energy comes from the solar collectors.
It's estimated the Liddell Solar Project will save 6,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide from being emitted annually. Is the answer to our future energy needs blowing in the wind? Presently a major coal burner, Macquarie Generation is hoping to enter the wind market, but in terms of large-scale production, the company says it would take nearly 25,000 wind turbines to match the electricity output of just 2 coal-fired power stations.
Now that's not practical. I mean, that's not acceptable to a community to put that amount of windmills around the countryside.
Solar and wind is not going to produce baseload power. That's impossible. All the experts tell you that. We have close to 40% of the world's uranium reserves, we would be crazy to say no to nuclear power.
Nuclear energy emits virtually no greenhouse gases, yet ironically, nuclear is a dirty word. Among a number of factors, its bad reputation is thanks to a steam explosion in 1986 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It's been reported that up to 250,000 people died as a result of the disaster. However, nuclear physicist from the University of Newcastle, Colin Kay, says at Chernobyl only 40 people died from nuclear radiation. He says Chernobyl was caused by design flaws in Soviet reactors and disregard for safety procedures.
There have been over 10,000 reactor years of fatality-free operation of all Western nuclear reactors.
15% of the world's electricity is generated using nuclear power. 32 countries have nuclear power stations.
The biggest argument from the anti-nuclear sector surrounds the disposal of nuclear waste.
There are pros and cons for nuclear power. Yes, it's low greenhouse gas emissions, but then you've got the problem of the waste disposal.
In great contrast to his contemporary Labor colleagues, former Prime Minister Bob Hawke has called for the Australian outback to become a dumping ground for the world's nuclear waste. The idea is to charge other countries to deposit their nuclear waste in deep underground repositories.
Australia has, it's in the Northern Territory and northwestern Australia, geologically most stable sites in the world for the storage of nuclear waste.
The Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation says low-level nuclear waste can be disposed of in drums and encased in cement. Tomorrow night, we'll look at the prospects of another alternative, an amazing way of generating clean energy using super hot rocks underneath Australia's surface.
We'd be interested in talking to anybody who may have known the movements of this male person.
It was a blast from the past at Wednesday night's Speedway event as thousands packed the Newcastle showground. But in the light of day, this is the reality.
Newcastle showground is literally condemned. It's rotting down around us.
Speedway promoter Graham Boyd argues this valuable community asset needs urgent attention.
We've built a new fence for the showground, virtually holding up the old showground fence. We had to put in new grandstand seating for our VIPs.
The president of the Newcastle Showground Society couldn't agree more, especially considering this year's regional show has been cancelled because of the need for renovations. But Roger Geary says his group approached the state government almost 3 years ago.
Applications have been put in with the Minister for funding over the next 2 years to carry out urgent repairs and maintenance.
Heritage issues have caused delays with condemned buildings, but Newcastle's Lord Mayor says the state-owned facility must have state support.
It's not the sort of thing that we can put a lot of money into, but I'm certainly keen to work with the state to see it developed.
Mr Geary says he'd like funding confirmed before the March election to avoid the venue being used for political point scoring alongside Energy Australia Stadium.
Look, I don't want to play politics, I just want to get it done. My main concern is to try and get the show back on track.
Mitchell Hughes, NBN News.
Newcastle's CBD was once a much busier hive of activity, with Hunter Street a one-stop shopping strip. St Mark's Chapel, which opened in 1970, was part of that bustling city life, holding 2 daily masses which were well attended by business people and shoppers alike. But 36 years later, much has changed for the chapel, tucked in behind the Hunter Street Mall.
Once again, the commercial world and business world moved out into the suburbs. Shopping centres were developed, as you know, in other places, and the mall has never had much of a life, unfortunately.
And the number of parishioners has also declined.
They had to reduce the masses of a weekday just to one, Sunday Mass reduced to one, and then in 2004 the Redemptorist Fathers announced to Bishop Michael that they could no longer man this place.
The sale of the 315 square metre site is expected to attract interest from developers, possibly those behind the $60 million Stairway to Heaven plan launched in June last year. And while the doors close at St Mark's, a business is opening up, the owners filling a niche created by the growing number of people moving into newly built apartment blocks. The IGA supermarket will open at the end of this month on the ground floor of the redeveloped Winstore site. Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
No, he's not having a fit. This grown man is playing one of the more futuristic games at the Regional Museum's latest exhibition, Games People Play.
This one behind's pretty good. It's a bit of a workout. You're sort of trying to smack the little enemies down. It's good.
Here, toys that have been around for decades are teamed with technologically advanced super toys like the German-designed interactive pond, which is worth $13,000 to create a game lover's paradise. And it's certainly not just for youngsters.
The idea is to take a light-hearted look at an interesting topic, and especially as a holiday program.
For the traditionalists, there's giant versions of Connect 4, chess and Jenga, while those with a need for speed have lifelike car racing simulators. And then there's the ultimate toy, an Enzo Ferrari, worth $1 million. Up to 700 people played at the exhibition every day, and the critics all seem united in their verdict.
It's good, yeah, fun, there's lots of things to do. It's really fun and I enjoy them all.
The exhibition continues until the end of March. Madeline Bond, NBN News.
Ironman may be an individual sport, but the team's concept adds a whole new perspective to the National Series. Newcastle's Joshua Blair and Avoca's Daniel Shade are two of the six-person Northern Hammers team who were keen to get out of the blocks quickly on what is their home event.
Tomorrow's going to be a big key because it's one race, all on the line in the Ironman, plus your team events afterwards, but you're really going to have to lead from the front, and that's sort of what I'm going to try and do from tomorrow morning.
It would help if today's flat conditions were turned on their head.
I need surf, mate. That's where I sort of shine, or if it gives me half a chance, you know, just a bit more tactics come into play, and getting you out of the break, there's a bit more skill involved rather than just fitness.
He's still getting over the tough trial series raced only weeks ago at Terrigal.
That was the killer, mate. I lost 5 kilos over that weekend just from racing. I had 8 weeks to prepare for that trial, and I came together pretty good on the day.
The last time Newcastle hosted a round of the National Series was back in 2002, and Zane Holmes was successful on that day. He should figure well in the count again on the weekend, along with his teammate Shannon Eckstein. Rolling those guys will be a big task, but not impossible.
I haven't put any pressure on myself, and I mean, I don't sort of need to. I've been around long enough and obviously experienced enough to race well.
I've got a great base behind me, as will a number of other guys like Zane Holmes and Nathan Smith from New South Wales. So we'll see back to the short course racing how it goes.
Age is nothing to me. Look, I've got to get in there and mix it with the best of them. There's certainly no courtesy for the young guys here, so I'm really looking forward to racing these guys.
The outback burns under the searing heat of the Australian sun, but the real hot property out here lies beneath the Earth's surface. The Cooper Basin in South Australia has the hottest rock structure on Earth outside of volcanic areas. Out here, Brisbane company Geodynamics is developing an energy project known as hot fractured rock geothermal energy. The company's first well has been drilled 4.5 kilometres deep, where hot granite has been found to measure between 250 and 300 degrees Celsius. Basically, it works like this. Water would be pumped down a well and circulated through cracks in those extremely hot granites. The water, now heated to more than 200 degrees Celsius, is returned to the surface under pressure. The heat from the water is then extracted and used to drive a turbine at a nearby power station, generating electricity. Geodynamics says the hot rock system is capable of generating baseload electricity on a large scale and is relatively inexpensive. It's estimated the power would cost around $40 per megawatt hour, which is only slightly more than the average cost of coal. But don't expect the coal industry to be buried anytime soon. Coal is expected to be burnt to generate electricity for the next 40 years, despite the best efforts of anti-coal protesters.
But if you close down Australia overnight, if you do what Greenpeace would seem to want us to do, and shut down every single powerhouse in Australia, just the growth in the Chinese economy in the next 12 months would see that replicated. So what we did here would make no difference.
And of course, the coal industry is not just vital to Australia for electricity needs. Coal is our greatest export commodity. But for the long term, perhaps in the next 50 years, energy producers are starting to think nuclear. Even coal giant Macquarie Generation would consider flicking the switch to nuclear power.
If it becomes essential that electricity is produced without any carbon dioxide at all, and if the rules change to permit nuclear, then I think companies like this and our competitors would all progressively move down that path.
In the meantime, though, the world and Australia's thirst for electricity means we'll be burning coal and these ships will be leaving Newcastle Harbour for a long time to come. Todd Nardi, NBN News.
Newcastle's tourism ship came in today and received a royal welcome from the Fort Scratchley Guns. The six-star Italian luxury cruiser, the Silver Cloud, is carrying 200 passengers and 200 crew, and that means big bucks for the Hunter, injecting thousands of dollars into the economy.
A ship like this contributes, research says, around $250,000 a day while in port, and that's a combination of shipping agent charges but also spent by the crew and passengers.
Newcastle's cafes were flat out keeping up with the influx of cashed-up international visitors.
I'd done my morning's trade within 2 hours this morning. There were so many people around and it's still going on strong. It's great.
Well, we got off the cruise ship this morning. We're from Ireland and we're having a walk around your lovely town and enjoying it immensely.
Everyone's very friendly, very bright, and it looks to be a nice place. Wouldn't mind living here.
The ship will remain in port at the Throsby No. 1 wharf until 11 o'clock tonight, and a waterside restricted zone extending 15 metres around the ship and marked with buoys has been set up. But it's not the only thing bringing tourists into town this weekend, with crowds gathering at Newcastle Beach for day one of the National Ironman Series. Madeline Bond, NBN News.
There was a far different mood at this recovery session, with the Jets all smiles after scoring a win they had to have. But that's not to say they can rest easy with 2 rounds remaining.
We can't sort of relax and sit there. We can't rely on other results. We've got to go out there and get more points to confirm that top 4.
Kovic did some confirming of his own last night. After conceding 5 goals in his first 2 starts, the Socceroos' number 2 keeper proved why he's now number 1 at Newcastle. Milton Rodriguez has always been at home at the Jets, and his 6th goal of the season put the home side in the box seat. Kovic continued to deny the Mariners at the other end, while Mark Bridge would have loved to have done better with this. Holding a 1-0 lead is never easy, and the second half became more about hanging on than extending the lead. But hang on they did to jump into 4th position. They head to Perth this weekend without Stuart Mashalik though. His 4th yellow card now means a 1-week suspension. You couldn't have asked for better conditions overhead for the opening round of the series, but it was in the water where it really counted. For someone who didn't feel too well this morning, Christy Harris hardly looked troubled. Behind her though, it was carnage in the ski leg. Teammate Hayley Bateup was in all sorts, and making matters worse, the 2-time Coolangatta Gold winner was disqualified. Harris winning with plenty of time to spare. The men's race didn't go to plan for the locals, with Joshua Blair and Daniel Shade both caught well back in the pack. Zane Holmes won the last time the series was in town, and he felt right at home on his return. He made it home first from teammate Shannon Eckstein. Blair well back, but with a day to make amends.
Tomorrow's it, so let's hope that I can put something special on for the crowd.
The January drought figures are another chapter in what's been a woeful 12 months for the region's primary producers. Maitland Rural Lands Protection Board has seen no respite from the big dry, and for the 10th straight month, the Hunter and Merriwar Mudgee Rural Lands Protection Boards are drought declared. Primary Industries Minister Ian MacDonald says he was pleased that some drought-ravaged parts of the Hunter had received up to 29 millimetres since early December. However, according to the Rural Lands Protection Boards, it's nowhere near enough to get the region out of trouble. While the lower Hunter's water supply catchment may have recorded over 100 millimetres in the past month, the western parts of the valley only received falls ranging from as little as 37 millimetres to, in some rare cases, as much as 55 millimetres. Madeline Bond, NBN News. Clad in their Sunday best, Newcastle's Greek Orthodox community gathered around the bogey hole to hear a special prayer and watch as a metallic cross covered in fresh basil was thrown into the water to bless it, symbolic of Jesus' baptism.
It is a protection, it is a prayer for the people of this country and for all that they work at the sea.
The race was then on between 3 young men to retrieve the sacred relic.
They consider that as an extra blessing, a special blessing from above for the rest of the year, and I hope for the rest of their life.
But it was 15-year-old Timothy Mavrazakis who got there in the end.
I just jumped in and hoped for the best. And thanks to God I got it.
More prayers were then offered to protect seafarers and to ensure the nation's peace and prosperity. Madeline Bond, NBN News.
From round 1 I made a couple of mistakes. I was happy with the way I raced, but made a couple of mistakes, so I was looking to do a little bit better than that.
Forget the summer feeling on the beach. In the water, it was Arctic-like, with several competitors struggling in the cold. Some didn't even finish, and at least one required a trip to hospital, while Hayley Baidup's tough weekend continued in the heats, with the dual Coolangatta Gold winner getting little joy on the craft. In the men's, Josh Blair was flying the local flag, but the effects of the flu and a long weekend of racing was taking its toll, and he was mid-pack for most of his heat before slipping out of contention for the final altogether. Avoca's Daniel Shade was in the top 3 and sitting pretty before his strongest leg turned into his worst. From top of the pack to the bottom in the blink of an eye, and his hopes of making the final were over.
Yeah, that's my favourite leg, the board, and I fell off on that wave coming in, that was it. So there's an A and a B final, so took it easy for the rest of that and hopefully come in the top couple of places for the B.
Racing in the B final, it was a far different story for both, with the pair actually sharing the lead for much of the race before the final ski legs sorted the field out. Phil Clayton got the jump on them to win, but a second place to Blair at least gave him something to cheer about after what's been a disappointing home event.
It has been frustrating, felt quite flat coming into this race, so sort of nice to finish off being in the front in one of those races, even though it was a B final.
The series now heads north to Coolum for rounds 3 and 4 in mid-February.